He thought she cleaned his mansion and disappeared, until he followed her and saw her living in a car with 2 children. Asterisk, asterisk. When billionaire Henry Langford quietly followed his loyal maid, Rosa, he expected her to return to a modest home. Instead, she pulled into a shadowed alley, tucked her sleeping kids under a worn blanket in the backseat of her car, and kissed them goodnight. That moment shattered everything he thought he knew and changed the course of his life forever. Asterisk, asterisk. Rosa never spoke much. She moved through Henry's mansion like a breeze, silent, dependable, always early, always kind. She knew where every smudge lived, where every forgotten flower drooped. The staff barely noticed her because she demanded nothing, not even attention. She moved like someone who had long ago decided that silence was safer than being seen. Henry Langford, a man worth billions, barely remembered hiring her. She came recommended through a high-end agency he never contacted directly. His assistant handled those things, and yet, for over 6 months, Rosa had quietly become a fixture of his home. Not his life, he would never have called it that, but of his environment. She wiped away dust as if it personally offended her. She folded his towels with a sort of gentle reverence. She treated his home better than anyone ever had, including himself. Only once had he truly noticed her. A storm had rolled in violently, one afternoon, rattling the windows of his study where he worked, buried under mergers and acquisitions. He'd been speaking to a Saudi investor, distracted and annoyed, when she quietly placed a mug of coffee on the desk beside him. He looked up startled. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with something else. Fatigue, deep and bone-heavy. He watched her slip away before he could speak. He asked his assistant her name the next day. Just Rosa, she said. No complaints, no delays, no drama. Just Rosa. He began to watch, though he never spoke to her again. He noticed the way she glanced out the tall window sometimes, staring at the gray sky like it whispered a secret only she could hear. She always left at exactly 6 p.m., even if she hadn't finished. She'd never once asked for an advance, a raise, or a moment of rest. One Friday evening, Henry found himself standing in the front corridor as Rosa slipped on her thin coat. He surprised himself when he said, "Can I give you a ride?" Rosa froze. She turned slowly, eyes wide. "No, sir, thank you. I'm fine." He noticed then how carefully she picked her words. Polite, controlled. Her voice was soft, and her smile was gentle, but her eyes were distant, like someone who never let herself get too close to anything she couldn't afford to lose. He nodded, pretending to accept a lie, but the idea stuck in his head all night that someone like Rosa, who served his life with such precision, could be suffering in ways he'd never bothered to see. It gnawed at something in him. Not pity, not quite guilt, just discomfort. The discomfort of confronting how easy it was to ignore the lives of those who served as his own. That night, as her small gray sedan pulled away from the estate gates, Henry slipped into the back of his own black town car and asked his driver to follow quietly, discreetly. The driver didn't question it. Money had its ways of bypassing moral hesitation. They followed her for 20 minutes, through the glittering veins of the city that slowly faded into less polished roads. The skyline disappeared. The trees grew fewer, the buildings more worn. Then, she turned down a narrow alley and pulled behind a closed mechanic shop. Henry leaned forward, the engine of her car cut off. He watched as Rosa stepped out into the fading light. Her shoulders slumped, as though a weight she carried all day could only be released in darkness. Then she opened the back door, and 2 children, maybe 5 and 7, crawled out, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Henry's breath caught. She knelt down beside them, her back to him, and took a paper bag from the front seat. She unwrapped a sandwich, cut it carefully in half with a small plastic knife, and gave each child a piece. She shared the drink, one of those dollar store apple juices, in turns. Then, she unfolded a worn quilt, laid it across the back seat, and lifted the smallest child up, brushing his hair back before tucking him into what he clearly understood as his bed. She kissed him on the forehead, lingered a moment, then did the same with the older girl. Then Rosa sat outside the car on an old milk crate, alone, her shoulders hunched, her face tilted toward the stars. And Henry Langford, billionaire, reclined in Italian leather while watching a woman raise her children in the back seat of a car parked behind a garage. He didn't speak the whole way home. The next morning, Rosa arrived as she always did, early, clean, composed. Her uniform was pressed, her hair pulled back, her hands moved just as swiftly, but he noticed now the slight stiffness in her right wrist, the way she winced when she stretched to reach the top shelves in the kitchen. Couldn't look at her without remembering the way she'd kissed her children's foreheads like it was all she had to give. For the first time in years, he canceled his morning meetings. All day he watched her from a distance. She never once asked to sit, even though she limped slightly when she thought no one could see. She refused the fresh croissants laid out by the chefs. She barely touched water. It was like she didn't want to owe the house a single thing. That night, he asked his assistant to find out more. "Rosa," he said, "I want to know everything. Where she lives, her family, her emergency contact, her background." It wasn't easy. There was almost nothing. Her address was listed as a shelter downtown, but she hadn't signed in there in months. No phone number, no family listed. One Emergency contact, a place called the Mercy Hands Outreach Center. He drove there himself. The center was small, tucked between two abandoned storefronts. A woman behind the desk blinked in surprise when he gave Rosa's name. She used to come here for food, she said cautiously. Real proud woman. Stopped showing up a while ago. Why? Henry asked. She didn't want her kids to see her beg. He sat in his car afterward, the engine running, the air cool, but his mind reeling. Rosa had served him, cleaned his empire, for 6 months without a single day off, while sleeping in a car, feeding her children dollar sandwiches, shielding them from the cold with nothing but love and an old quilt. She never asked him for anything. The next day, Henry waited until she finished wiping down the marble staircase before asking her into his office. She came hesitantly, her eyes unsure. Close the door, he said. She did. He studied her. Not the uniform, not the posture, just her, Rosa. Why didn't you tell anyone? He asked softly, her hands clenched. About what, sir? Your situation. She hesitated. Her voice, when it came, was steady but tired. Because I need this job, and people don't hire problems. I'm not people, he said. Yes, you are, she replied, just richer. The silence sat heavy. He leaned forward. Where are your children now? In the car. At a friend's garage. Safe? You're not going back there. She looked up sharply. Please don't fire me. Just 2 more paychecks. I have a lead on a studio. I'm close. I'm not firing you, he said. I'm buying you a house. Rosa stood frozen. I don't want charity. It's not charity, he said. It's human decency. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't try to hide them. Within 3 days, a modest home was purchased under her name. 3 bedrooms, a little front porch, a kitchen with real sunlight. Her children danced in the empty living room, their laughter louder than anything Henry had ever heard echo through his marble halls. She cooked him dinner that weekend. Nothing fancy, just rice and beans and cornbread. But it was the first meal he'd eaten with someone who looked him in the eye like a person, not a bank account. Her children took to him immediately. The boy called him Mr. H. The girl gave him drawings to hang in his office. Over time, Henry realized it wasn't his wealth that had changed Rosa's life. It was her that had changed his. Her quiet dignity, her fierce love, her resilience. One evening, months later, Rosa stood beside him on her front porch as the sun dipped below the trees. She turned to him and said softly, "You saw me." He nodded. "I should have seen you sooner." She smiled. Most people don't want to look. And that was when Henry Langford, billionaire, finally understood what it meant to be rich, not in money, in seeing, in choosing not to look away. For days, Henry Langford moved like a man underwater. Food lost its taste. His designer bed, with its Egyptian cotton sheets and temperature-regulated mattress, felt foreign beneath him. The very walls of his mansion, cold marble, silent hallways, perfectly arranged art seemed to echo, with a gentle hum of a woman's presence he had barely noticed until now. Rosa's soft laughter, once a background note in his otherwise sterile world, now replayed in his mind like a haunting melody. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a defiance. A holding on. How had he never seen it? How had he missed the quiet war being waged beneath? The steady rhythm of her broom, the clink of dishes, the gentle folding of blankets in guest rooms no one ever used. He found himself watching the security footage from the hallway just to catch glimpses of her moving through the house. There was something about the way she touched things, not like a cleaner, but like a keeper. She didn't just clean, she restored, preserved, cared. Her hands treated his world like it mattered, even when hers was falling apart. He zoomed in once on the footage, pausing the screen where her shoe bent awkwardly at the sole. Stitched crudely, she had stitched her shoes. Another frame revealed the hem of her sleeve, frayed and hidden under her wrist, and her eyes, when no one was watching, carried a weight that no human should bear alone. Henry, who had signed billion-dollar contracts without blinking, couldn't bring himself to open his laptop. He didn't want to see numbers. He wanted answers. He called in his assistant, a sharp, efficient woman named Claire who rarely asked questions. "Find out where Rosa lives," he said quietly, avoiding her gaze. Claire tilted her head. "Is there a problem?" "No," he said. "There's, but not with her. Just find out." When Claire returned an hour later, her expression had changed. "She has no official address. She listed a women's shelter on her employment form 6 months ago, but they say she hasn't stayed there in weeks. No phone number, no next of kin. One emergency contact, a shelter downtown. That's it." Henry sat in silence. It was a strange kind of silence, guilt, yes, but also awe. How had someone with nothing managed to give so much? He walked into the kitchen and saw Rosa humming softly as she wiped down the marble island. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. Her eyes dimmed with sleeplessness, but her lips still warm. "Rosa," he said, his voice tighter than he expected. "Would you come to my office for a moment?" Her smile faltered. Her hands hesitated on the cloth, but she nodded and followed him. Smoothing her apron in the office, she stood with her back straight, hands folded in front of her. "Please don't fire me," she whispered before he could speak. I just need 2 more paychecks and I'll get them into housing. I have a lighter real one this time. Henry stared at her. Something in his throat closed like a gate. Rosa, he said, and the way her name cracked in his voice startled them both. You're not going back to that car. She blinked. I'm serious, he said. You're not sleeping in a car. Not again. Not one more night. A tear welled in her eye. She blinked it away with practiced precision. I don't want pity, Mr. Langford. It's not pity, he said. It's responsibility. You don't owe me anything. He leaned forward. That's where you're wrong. She stood still for a long time. She didn't argue further. She just nodded, as though something in her finally gave up the weight it had been dragging through the mud for too long. That night, Henry made calls. Not to realtors, not to agencies, to people, real people. He asked Claire to clear his schedule. For the week, he asked his driver to take him to neighborhoods he'd never dared set foot in, not because he was afraid, but because he had never cared enough to look. He met with social workers, with local pastors, with shelter managers. He didn't introduce himself as a billionaire, just a man who had failed to see. He returned late each night, exhausted. But it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from doing something that mattered. 3 days later he found it a small, 2-bedroom bungalow on a quiet street with blooming azaleas and a cracked sidewalk. The house needed paint, a little plumbing work, and a new roof, but it had a warmth to it, a soul. He bought it on the spot, paid cash, told the real estate agent to put the deed in Rosa's name. The next morning he asked Rosa to come with him. No explanation. She hesitated, confused but obeyed. The drive was quiet. He didn't try to fill it with empty words. When they arrived, Rosa stepped out slowly, looking around, her brow furrowed. This isn't where I work, she said. Softly. No, Henry replied. It's where you'll live. She turned to him, the confusion in her eyes turning to disbelief. I don't understand. It's yours. What's the house? It's yours. She stared at him, then at the house, then back at him. No, she said. No, I can't. You can, he said gently. You deserve more than a job. You deserve dignity. You deserve rest. Her knees buckled, and for a moment he thought she might collapse. He caught her by the elbow, steadying her. Inside the car, her children peeked out from the back seat. Henry waved them forward. The girl, wide-eyed and curious, stepped onto the porch and looked back at her mother. Is this our house? Rosa didn't speak. She couldn't. Her voice had gone. Henry knelt beside the little girl. Yes, he said. This is your home now. The boy followed, his hand sticky with jelly from the sandwich he had been eating. He darted inside the open front door and screamed with joy. His laughter echoed from the empty walls. That night, Henry didn't return to his mansion. He stayed to help Rosa unload what little she owned: 3 trash bags of clothes, a shoebox of keepsakes, and an old photo of her late husband, crinkled and sun-worn. She placed it on the mantel like it belonged there. He watched her show the children the bedroom they would share. They argued over which bed was whose. She kissed them both and said, "We'll figure it out." And then she stood in the kitchen, her hands pressed to the counter, tears streaming down her face. Henry approached quietly. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You already have," he said, "every day." In the weeks that followed, Rosa changed. She smiled more. Her laugh came quicker, and not just from politeness, but from joy. She returned to work with the same diligence, but something was different now. She carried herself like someone who belonged in the world. Henry noticed things changing in himself too. He didn't rush through meetings. He began asking his staff about their lives. One day he shut down his office early and had everyone go home paid. No questions asked, just to breathe. He began visiting the shelter where Rosa had once stayed. He donated, but not with a giant novelty check. He sat down and listened. He learned names. He remembered faces. One day, Rosa brought him a small lunch she had packed herself. Homemade tamales, wrapped in foil. "It's nothing fancy," she said, a little shy. He took one bite and nearly cried. It tasted like memory, like care. "Thank you," he whispered. "No," she replied. "Thank you for seeing me." Years passed. The children grew. Rosa's daughter won a scholarship to college. Her son started a lawn business and saved for his own truck. The house that Henry had once bought grew with them walls painted, pictures hung, laughter sewn into every room. And Henry, the man who once measured life in profits and losses, now found joy in birthdays, in holidays, in surprise visits from Rosa with leftover soup or just to check in on him. He left instructions in his will to donate 10% of his estate to Mercy Hand Shelter. But more than that, he left a note tucked in a drawer of his desk. "To anyone who finds this, remember, the world doesn't need more billionaires. It needs more people who notice." And that is the story of a man who followed his maid and found his soul. The next morning, Rosa didn't report to the mansion. Instead, she was brought to a small white house with a red door and flowers planted in front. Her name was painted on the mailbox. Inside, her children squealed, their laughter echoing in walls they'd never known. A kitchen full of food, a warm bed. Hope. It was the first time in months she had seen them play without fear. without shivering, without asking if they had to move again the next day. They ran from room to room, their bare feet slapping against the hardwood floors, marveling at the space, the silence, the light. Rosa stood frozen in the entryway. The keys, still warm in her palm, felt foreign as though they belonged to someone else. The house had a scent she couldn't name. Not bleach, not mildew, not the plastic-smelling sheets of the shelters. It smelled like morning, like possibility, like freedom. She turned slowly, taking in the sunlight pooling on the tile of the kitchen floor, the small window over the sink, the row of cabinets that didn't creak. Her throat tightened. A paper bag with groceries sat on the counter. Eggs, bread, real milk. A note in Henry's careful handwriting for tomorrow or today, whenever you're ready. She walked to the living room and sank onto the couch, which was covered in a soft tanned fabric that hugged her tired body. Her daughter climbed into her lap, and her son leaned against her side, chattering about which room he wanted and how he planned to build a rocket out of pillows. Rosa nodded, smiling, but tears spilled down her cheeks. She hadn't cried like this in years, not since the night she lost her husband, not since the eviction notice was taped to their door. Her hands had always been too full for grief. That night, she dressed in her best blouse, not for work, but for something she couldn't name, something sacred. She left the children with a neighbor who had already welcomed them with cookies and wide eyes. Then she walked 3 blocks and caught the bus back to the mansion. She stepped into the warm lights of the estate's side entrance and climbed the stairs to the office where Henry Langford worked late into the evenings. She knocked softly at first, then again. "Come in," he said, distracted, papers spread across his desk. When he saw her, he stood. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at him, this man who had unknowingly held her fate in his hands and, for once, had chosen grace. "You didn't just give us a home," she whispered. "You saw me." Henry's eyes shimmered. He nodded once. That was all. He didn't need thanks. He didn't want it. What he had seen in Rosa's children, their laughter, their peace, was thanks. Enough. In the days that followed, Rosa adjusted to a new life with both awe and hesitation. She still rose early, still folded her children's clothes with perfect creases, still swept the floor every night as though the house might vanish in her sleep if she left even one crumb behind. But slowly, she softened. The children made friends. At school, she found herself lingering by the window to watch them play in the small yard. She volunteered at the shelter she'd once needed. She smiled more easily, stood taller. And Henry, he changed too. He started noticing people, not just their roles but their eyes, their stories. He walked the halls of his mansion differently now, stopping to greet the staff by name. He hosted fewer parties and more dinners, inviting community leaders, social workers, people who'd never passed through his gates before. He gave to shelters quietly, funding programs without fanfare. And sometimes, on weekends, he would stop by Rosa's house, never uninvited, never for long, just to hear how her kids were doing, to share a meal, to sit on the porch and breathe. One day, Rosa handed him a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing her son had made. Stick figures, one tall, one smaller, a red door between them, the word family written in block letters. Henry pinned it to the wall of his office, right above his desk. Years passed. The neighborhood grew around Rosa's house. Her children flourished. Her daughter graduated college, the first in the family. Her son opened a small tech repair shop and hired kids from the local high school. The house, the one with the red door, became a kind of legend. People whispered about it as the place where something miraculous happened, where a woman got a second chance, where a man remembered what it meant to be human. That Henry never married. He didn't need to. He had family. He had laughter on Sunday afternoons. He had the drawing still pinned to his wall, curling at the edges with time. And Rosa, she never stopped cleaning. Not really. But now she cleaned a home that was hers, a home filled with love, a home that began with a gesture, a key, a red door, but became so much more. A place where she had finally been seen, and for Henry, that would always be the richest thing he ever gave.